Right, well, welcome Jeff Solomon from Markup Hero, but also 6 times founder of other SaaS companies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Why don't you start with a very brief overview of who you are and maybe some of the highlights of the companies you work for?
Sure. Yeah, I've been an entrepreneur most of my career. I started working at a plastic manufacturing company, guy that my dad knew when I got out of college. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I certainly didn't grow up thinking I was an entrepreneur, but it was during the Internet 1.0 days, and I did some tech work and got really excited about software at that time and left there to start, working in tech and software. And first company crashed and burned, raised a few $100,000, had no business model, no problem solving. And, it was fun, and I learned some great stuff about software, but also really the lesson was, figure out a problem before you go out and try and solve something. And then, I got smarter, started doing some consulting in the tech space, got my chops better on building actual software. And then, the first big thing I had was Velocify, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which was a CRM platform largely for the financial services space. Grew that from zero, to 180 people and sold that in 2014, I want to say, or 17. Yeah, 17. And have also been on the venture side. I started a incubator accelerator here in LA called Amplify. We're on our 5th fund now. We've invested, upwards of 50 million into companies, 100, maybe 200 companies here in the greater LA area, and still working on that. And I sold a mobile app content company a couple years back. And like you mentioned, I've been working on this Markup Hero file annotation suite, which is has a normal sell to consumer, sell to business person product, but also we have an API library that we're trying to do some work on getting that implemented into other SaaS applications. So we can talk a little bit about that as a business shift or pivot for a lot of your listeners potentially.
Let's start with maybe some of the lessons learned at Velocify. You grew that to essentially, if I listen correctly, from 0 to 180 people.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of lessons. And the thing is, like I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, the needs and challenges change as the company grows, so the things that were important when we were 20 people or less were very different. In the early days, it was just I was so heavily focused on culture, finding the right people and getting them in the right spots. I was a big fan of Good to Great and the Jim Collins work, and was just out there trying to find great, talented people, and that really got along, and we all felt like a family for those first, few years. And that was a huge boon to productivity and production levels, and people would just work crazy hours because they were part of the family. And over time, as that grew, it became harder and harder to maintain that culture. We had to get more and more senior executive specialists in different categories, different roles, and it was more difficult to maintain the culture. And so the needs changed, to really focusing on scalability as we started to bring in more clients that were larger, that had more security concerns. We had to get more sophisticated. In the early days, we were super scrappy. It's like customer would come on board and they'd be like, oh, really needed to do this. And you'd be like, okay, no problem. And 48 hours later, we'd have that feature,
Right.
And it was fine when you had 20 clients and you could just release it. And if something went wrong, you just called them and be like, hey, hang tight, we're going to fix it. But when Bank of America is one of your clients, or Chase or Citi or these guys that we had later down the line, they weren't having it, so we had to be real thoughtful and careful. And that's some of the stuff that changed. Marketing, always an important part, like how we acquired new customers. Mm-hmm. A couple of things. I continue to be very content oriented marketer. I build a lot of content. I find ways to distribute content. And that was an early strategy at Velocify, not because I knew that worked. It was just because I just was so new to being a CEO of a growing company. That was really the first thing that worked, for me. So okay. I was like, I better document what's going on because I'm kind of lost, And so I just created a blog that was, and this has become a popular strategy of startup founders I've seen, where
Right.
I just start documenting like what we're going through, like the ups and downs. And one of the things that that did is it created, you know, a level of trust and authenticity amongst clients. And so people would, you know, would come to us and be like, "Hey, I want to work with you guys. You seem like a really authentic, good company that is going to
Right.
do good work for us, and that's the kind of company I want to work for."
Yeah.
You know, I remember I remember being at a trade show. We were probably 50, 60 people at this time, and a guy came up to me from a big bank. We were servicing a lot of banks at that time. And he said, "Hey, you're Jeff Solomon, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, Honestly, I have no idea what you do, like what your business is, but I just want to work with you. I just want to work with you."
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
like, "Well, let me tell you about the business," you know, and they ended up being a client. But he fell in love with the spirit of what we were doing. And he knew we did something in his space, and we were working with some of his competitors. So he's like, "I got
Right.
to figure out what these guys are up to." And that was because of, you know, the content we were putting it out and the, you know, the positioning of the org and the way we were. And it was, you know, there was a lot of authenticity there, and that worked really well.
Would you say that blog was more content that your potential customers would like, or was it more content like storytelling that people find interesting to follow?
Initially, it was storytelling, you know, and I dovetailed in the products and services in the market so it was relevant, but it was more storytelling about this startup founder's journey and this company's journey. Over time, you know, when I realized it was working, I started, you know, pivoting and doing more content that was valuable and useful to our clients in the industry, and we became known as a thought leader. In fact, one of the things that we did really well, we had so much data because all of our clients had a lot of their customers and leads in our platform. And what we started to do was analyze the results of their data in an anonymized fashion. And at one point, we started putting out an annual report on what worked and what didn't work, and anonymized, like we didn't tell who did what. But we were able to tell that when you do this activity or this behavior or this kind of lead or this kind of customer, these data points, these are the results across, you know, 500 companies that are like you, like yours. And so people would read that report and be like, "Wow, I operate like that, and these guys have some really interesting insights. I'd like to take advantage of that." And that report became a standard in the industry for us, and people just trusted us as this like thought leader in the space.
Right. Oh, wow. So you did this way before Salesforce started doing this.
I mean, it was early. I mean, Salesforce probably had some of that type of content, but you know, in our industry, because most of our clients didn't use Salesforce because the product was very specialized for financial services. You know, which in the long run and in hindsight, and I'll share this for your listeners. One of the things to think about if you're trying to build a company that can get a big exit, you have to think about how valuable are the customers going to be for acquirers. And I did not think about that. I just thought, "Hey, we got another customer. Hey, we got another customer." But in the end, a lot of our customers were not attractive to companies like Salesforce because they couldn't sell them anything else. And so they don't buy a company for that reason. They might buy it to take a competitor out. They've done that. But they might buy it for revenue, but our revenue wasn't even at the number that would make a difference for them. So they would have to look at us strategically. Hey, if I bought these 500 companies on, can I sell, you know, another $100,000 a year in services to these 500 companies? And Salesforce couldn't. And so we ended up limiting our exit opportunities. We still did great. Like we had a huge exit. It was great. But the multiple was not the kind of multiples that you see on some of these SaaS companies that are selling to, you know, these monster companies. So that's something to think about for a company that's growing. Like who's going to like these clients?
So on the one hand, picking a vertical, which you did, is, I think, great for your positioning and for your marketing people and for your sales teams. But your advice is pick the right vertical if your strategy is to exit at some point in time.
Yeah, I think it's nuanced because like I would probably err on the side of picking the vertical that you're solving a really significant pain for and that you can grow in. I would rather do that over trying to optimize for an exit, because getting to that exit point is so hard. Like so many other things need to go right. I think you're better optimizing for the business to work successfully, and then, you know, but as you grow, start to think about that. So as you get into the $50 million revenue range, start to think about, hey, like we're getting up to the numbers where we could exit. Like what should we do? Where should we go that's going to be attractive to the kinds of companies that might buy us. And then you start thinking about.
On the other hand, with fintech booming at this moment, wasn't it not just too early for you to exit? Maybe you would have had a much higher valuation by now with fintech being very hot at the moment.
Possibly. You never know.
One never knows. The timing for exit is never right. But
yeah, I mean, it's all in fintech, like other verticals, is very cyclical. Like we had the business, we were killing it in 2007, and then in 2008, we literally, cycled through 100% of our clients. Like 100% of our clients went out of business. We had to completely backfill our entire base. We almost went under at that year. It was so bad because of the recession and the subprime, issues. So. Yeah, it is timing, and a lot of that stuff is just out of your control, and I think we ran the company for 14 years. I think people were kind of ready to like find an exit too.
Also in 2008, that must have been very tough that all of your customers or most of them go out of business and you have to go find new ones.
It was brutal. Like we almost went under. I had to do a mass layoff, which is very stressful and terrible for everyone. We had this core team of people that were like fired up. We had just raised, $3.5 million our first round, and we burned through that, in like 12 months because of that. And we had to not only find new clients in the space, because the space didn't go away. It's just a lot of the clients that we had did. And we had to diversify into other categories. We went into education, we went into debt, we went into the other financial service categories, and, got some more balanced portfolio, which helped us weather the ups and downs of each. Insurance was a big category for us, stuff like that.
So looking a little bit further, when you started growing again, did you like put some kind of procedures or documents? And I think you briefly touched on this in the introduction that you mentioned. We had to go from a few people and just culture to now also being able to, have certain procedures to support larger clients. Was that something you had like a CEO put in, or did you do that by yourself? How did that process work?
Well, one of the things that I learned, which I think was really important for me, but maybe something that your listeners can take away from, is that, not every founder is designed for every stage of every company. And by that, I mean, turns out I'm really good at building companies from, 0 to 1, from 0 to 50, 75 people. That's like my sweet spot, because I can do everything well. I can't do one thing as an expert, but I can do a lot of stuff really good. And that's great when you're small, right? You need to be able to do a lot of stuff. As we grew past that point, we needed a VP of marketing that was just like an expert in X, Y, and Z. And we needed a, head of this division that was just really good at this one thing. And in a way, I started to become disruptive to the team, because I would kind of put my head in here and I want to get over there and I want to work on that. And I ended up, basically moving around roles. I was CEO, and then I was, head of product, and then I was head of marketing, and then head of sales. I built out the enterprise sales team. And eventually I got to a point in 2011 where it's like, I don't know if I'm the best person to be running or in this company. And I ended up leaving before we sold. I already had all my stock. It wasn't like I was going to get more stock. And that's when I started Amplify. And, I had hired this really seasoned guy, young guy, my age, to run BD. And, he was definitely a better fit for building a company from 100 to 180 people. And he moved him up and eventually put him in as CEO, and he took it through to the exit. And I was still involved and helped out, but overall it wasn't a fit for me. And that was very challenging to like leave your baby that you started in your garage, and a lot of founders don't do that and then sink with the ship. There are obviously founders that can make it, like Jeff Lawson at Twilio. He started from zero and he's now running a public company, right? So there are the guys that can do it. But for me, it was a learning experience. And you know what? It ended up being way more profitable for me. So if your listeners are thinking like, hey, is this the right place for me now that we're doing 50 million in sales? I already had all the stock. So the exit I got in 2017 was the exact same thing that would have been had I been there or not been there. But I was now able to apply my skills elsewhere, and I made a lot more money building other things during that time. So it was a profitable decision, but it was an emotional one. It was difficult,
And I agree. I actually did the same at Servoy. I grew the company as CEO to 80 people, and then my COO came to me and he said, I would like your job. And I said, you know what, that's a great idea. and he took my job, and that's when I left for the US out of Amsterdam to grow our sales here in the US. So I did stay within the company, although 3 years later I left to start new companies. But yeah, I agree with your lesson that you shouldn't be so stubborn that you can be the only CEO of the company if you're running a SaaS business. If you think it's, or even if you, like in my case, the company became so operational and I'm not an operational guy, you just need to have, and that's why our COO became CEO, you need to have a guy who's very good at that.
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
That's a very good lesson, yeah. So in my case, the COO was already the one who was putting in all the procedures like onboarding, like customer onboarding, like what is the process that we're going to follow. Did you have people follow that as well then?
Well, I was always pretty operational and pretty process-driven person as it is. So I had built a lot of systems to scale even in the early days. You know, we had a lot of learning around onboarding and training that helped us scale. So I put a lot of that stuff in. You know, as I exited out of that, you know, leadership role, we did end up, you know, needing to hire more people that could scale those processes, you know, for larger organizations. You know, when I built it, maybe our average client had like 50 seats. And then, you know, when I left, you know, we were bringing in clients that had like 300 or 400 seats. So, you know, different challenges there. So we had to evolve those processes. But we had a decent baseline because I was pretty anal about that in the early days.
So on the one hand, you're a big picture guy, but on the other hand, you also like to micromanage the business.
I think I think that's a good way to think about it. I do, you know, think very strategically, but I'm probably even better at extracting the strategies from my people. So good at sort of getting everybody else to give the nuggets and then package it up like, here's where we should go. But I am pretty good in the weeds, and that's why I'm really good from 0 to 50, you know, because like I'll actually do work.
Me being a tech guy, I'm always curious, what kind of tools and software did you use to manage those processes? Did you use maybe a combination of Google Docs and a workflow management system or a to-do list like Asana, or what kind of tools were in place to manage, let's say, a customer onboarding process?
Well, back then, I mean, we started that company in 2008. It was a very different time. There was a lot less
printed manuals back then.
Right. So a lot of those tools didn't exist. And so we ended up building a lot of custom things ourselves. So we had like an admin system that we managed all of our clients and all of our onboarding. And eventually we put in Salesforce to manage customers, but we still had a lot of custom things that worked well for us. You know, later in future companies that I've either consulted with or started, or even, you know, Markup here that I'm working on now, using much more modern tools. Asana in some cases. I use Notion everywhere I go. In a lot of cases, if it's early days, I'll use even Notion for tickets and sprints and managing product development, and not even, you know, get into Jira or Asana until it's a little bit larger of a team, because I just find it nice to be all on one platform.
So that's one of the powerful things about Notion, that in particular when you're getting started, you can quickly get structure, not?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Notion tools, workspaces that I have are pretty sophisticated, and we can do a lot in there. I think once you get past like 5 or 6 devs, then having, you know, a Jira or even Asana can be more helpful. But you can go pretty far with Notion now, and they keep upgrading it. Like, dude, Ivan's a master over there. He's got a good product.
So it sounds like you sort of write your business playbooks in Notion, and then you use Notion to roll them out to share the knowledge with other people.
Yeah, today, like, all the product requirements documents are built there. Back at Velocify, the product requirements were built in Word. Like, I would use a Word doc, I would make a PRD, and then I would get it to the devs. They would review it, they would turn it into tasks, and we put the tasks, I don't know what we were using for task management, like something like some bug management tool, like really basic one, Bugzilla or something like that. You know?
Oh yeah, back in the days.
Back in the day, yeah, something like that to manage the tasks. But yeah, now I write everything in Notion, and then we turn them into tickets inside a board in Notion for most of the projects that I'm working on today.
I guess once you get an organization larger, that becomes tricky, not with Notion, or is it still fine with?
No, I think it does get tricky. It's not designed for a lot of developers with a lot of simultaneous sprints. when you're running either a waterfall model or you're doing just one sprint, one group, your whole team, it's fine. But if you're having multiple branches and multiple releases and you multiple sprints, like you got to move into Jira is usually where I go, but you can do it in Asana too.
Okay. So that's more on the technical side, but so let's say your sales and marketing playbooks. Would you say that Notion is a great tool for that, or?
Yeah, I think Notion can scale on that front for sure.
Right.
I don't use any other specialized thing. I think trying to get Salesforce, and using all that is overkill. For me, Notion or similar tools is a great way to build all the content, create your content calendar, and manage all your relationships. I think that can scale just fine for a marketing team, to be honest.
Cool. That sounds like a pretty good tool to get started with. So getting out so you sold the business, then did a lot of stuff in the financial world, so investing in other software companies, and a lot of our listeners are having a SaaS company. Some of them are looking for capital. What is typically the type of companies, and what kind of properties would you be looking at?
In terms of the types of companies that venture investors are looking for, is that your question?
Yeah.
I mean, SaaS is always a hot space. I mean, at Amplify, we're always looking for SaaS deals, because they're very scalable and very profitable, versus, consumer social or consumer content. There could be some monster wins there. Like if the next Snapchat, you're in great shape, but it's really hard to win. And so we limit in that space.
Right.
Certainly if you're raising in the early days of your company and you don't have a lot of revenue to show, you're doing sort of a seed round or an initial Series A, you need to really show how you're acquiring customers and are you really solving a pain? Like, have you got product market fit? Those are the two things that investors are looking for.
Right.
And you can't just come and do an investor meeting and be like, okay, well, we're going to do social and we're going to run some Facebook ads and we're going to run some Google ads and we're going to do some content. You have to get really specific around like, hey, here's what we've tested and here's what's working. Here's the rest of the stuff we're going to test, depending on how far along you are. But really getting detailed on your acquisition strategies.
And at Amplify, did you do more early stage or later stage? What was the type of stage?
Oh, it's super early. We're like first money in.
Okay.
So like 100 grand, 150 grand.
So mainly pre-seed into solid ideas. Is that fair?
Yeah, we're probably a little more conservative in that we want a company that has at least a product in market. So we're not really doing idea stage stuff.
Okay.
Something in market, a little bit of traction with some customers. Yeah.
So more the ideas there, the products there. There's one or two customers. Now we need some money to find the next 100 customers.
Yeah. So then you're going for a second round or a Series B or whatever, and they're going to really look at how big is the market, how big can this thing actually get. They've tapped into something, but is this really scalable beyond what they're doing?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Okay, and now your new company, I think the product is very interesting. I think we all use one or two of those products. So on the one hand, Markup Hero is solving an issue that nearly everybody has, and I think you mentioned at the beginning that you're now moving away from what everybody else is doing, which is just markup, to also have a indirect strategy. Is that correct?
Yeah. So like you said, it's a highly commoditized space, very competitive, and we've been able to penetrate that market on the annotation and screenshot and markup space and make a nice business out of it. But what we've seen, and I have experience with a few other apps, is that in many SaaS applications, Notion included, the need to have annotated files inside your documents is important. And the way I kind of discovered this is because a long time ago I was using Evernote before Notion. And I would, be working on a product requirements document, and I'd want to take a screenshot and point out some stuff for the developer to know what's going on. I'd take a screenshot, I'd do the annotations, and I'd paste it into the note, which you can do in Notion, you can do in Asana, you can do in all these tools. And all those tools you can add an image, paste it in that's annotated. But what happens is I put it in, I'm like, oh, wait, actually, I want to change this. And then I have to go retake the screenshot, re-annotate it, and put it back in, delete the old one. And Evernote bought this company called Skitch like 10, 12 years ago. And they integrated it into the product. So when you paste an image or a PDF into Evernote, you right click on it and open, and it opens right in Skitch, right there. You annotate it, close it, shows up the page, and you can edit it and change it. It was like, it's the best feature they had. And I stuck with them for a long time just because of that. And you can't do that in Notion. And it's like, it seems to me like a no-brainer. And so we're like, let's build a library that other SaaS companies can implement easily and enable that exact capability in a SaaS environment. And that's what we're trying to do now. And it's a great way to shift our business a little bit so we have two revenue streams and get significant distribution. Like obviously Notion and Asana have way more users than we do. And even if, a couple users only do a couple of markups a month, it mounts up, and we charge on a per markup basis, not on a monthly basis based on users. So yeah, we're getting some traction there, starting out, starting slow, starting with smaller guys, but one of these days we're going to knock down one of the big clients and it'll be big.
And I can imagine that any SaaS company that needs, and I would say most SaaS companies get a lot of user feedback, usually in the form of text, somebody complaining something's not working, or then they start using external tools. I can imagine that they could embed a product like yours inside their system.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Where you push a button and then you annotate right there.
Yeah, that's what we built. We basically give them a library of code that enables them to create the interface, and the server side activity of the annotation happens on our server, but right. The actual experience happens within their product. They don't even know Markup Hero exists.
Right. Okay, that's a pretty good idea. And then so from a partnership, a sales point of view, you then make that software company a reseller, or do they become an OEM customer?
They become a client, so they pay us based on the usage of that. So if they have, and we charge on total usage, not per user. So if a user doesn't annotate anything, then there's no cost to them, right? It's only based on whoever uses it. So it's pretty inexpensive. And we're testing pricing models there. I don't know how that's going to ultimately pencil out. But yeah, the idea right now is just to get it in some hands of some really nice SaaS companies.
Yeah, but it seems to be the big trend going on in the past 5 years to move away from user-based pricing to usage.
Yeah, definitely is. And I was telling you before we jumped on the call, there's a couple of VCs now that are tracking an index of SaaS companies as API companies, that don't have a product you could sign up for and just start using. They only have an API. And Twilio being the leader in that space, but there's a lot of others now.
Right. So how did Twilio do really well in that, in your opinion?
Well, Twilio, interesting story. So I met Jeff Lawson when he was just launching Twilio, and we were actually bigger. Velocify was a bigger company at that time, and he was looking for early adopters. And we were implementing a telephony component, and we were looking for a partner to handle all the telephony stuff. And I met with him in San Francisco a couple of times, and we started working on it. And during those first year and a half of being one of their clients, not only did we become the single largest client on Twilio at that time, we were defining the roadmap, because we were telling them we need this, we got to do this. We were heavily using the product, and a lot of the stuff they built was because of what our clients wanted. And, eventually, obviously, they got huge, and Uber and all these other companies were using their product. But there was a good year or two where we were the dominant, number of minutes on their telephony platform. And they did a great job of identifying that this particular tech, the telephony tech, is a pain in the ass. It's a pain. It's not easy. So for you to become an expert and do it in-house just didn't make sense. And that was where Jeff really nailed it. Because, even in our case, the example of the Markup Hero, I would say it's somewhat of a pain. You know, maintaining a canvas with canvas tools is actually on web is actually painful. So
Yeah.
a lot of SaaS companies aren't going to want to do it,
Hmm.
but it is doable. So Notion could build it themselves. It doesn't really make sense for them to, but they could. Whereas
Right.
Twilio was like, there was no way we were going to become an expert in telephony. It's a nightmare, and it was just like a
Yeah.
no brainer for us to start using it.
So they sort of changed the very competitive VoIP landscape, which was everybody running their own brand of telephony, to saying we're going to integrate with existing software and really make that a seamless process.
Yep, yep, exactly, and
Uh,
it was great.
yeah. I think that's a very important lesson that a lot of SaaS companies don't realize yet. They're very much focused on putting their brand and their product up front. But how about embedding? I think embedding should be something that more SaaS companies think about upfront instead of as an afterthought.
Yeah, it's especially you had mentioned like if you have a product that's somewhat commoditized and you're having a tough time growing it because there's a lot of competitors, then that is a way, and that's exactly how we're thinking about it. That's a way to potentially expand your business and reach a ton more clients. The part that we're struggling with, and that I think the market is slowly catching up to, is that still a lot of SaaS companies, especially the successful ones that have a big dev team, they think in a similar way to what you just described, where it's like, well, we'll just build it ourselves. We'll just build it ourselves. But they never get to it because it's a
Yeah,
lower priority. It's like, well, why? Why do that? You know, so as
yeah,
more SaaS companies be like, you know what? I don't need to build this. This is a great feature. We can make money on it. They could charge extra for it. You know, they could make money on it.
right.
And I think more and more of those companies will start to see that like it's better to integrate things like that, and it will become easier for these API companies to get clients, which is the hardest part right now, is to get big clients.
Okay, that's an important lesson. I was just thinking about Sketch and how, I've been an Evernote and Sketch user for 12 years, and for some reason Evernote switched focus strongly on serving that. I was always a paying customer of Evernote. I happily gave them, what was it, $60 a year or so, because what they delivered was good. But the key things I relied on was their PDF indexing, because I need to, any mail that comes in, I index with them, and that still works. But they sort of didn't give enough attention to Sketch, and it never ported properly to the new Macs, so I had to ditch it
Mm-hmm.
last month. And I thought,
Oh, you stayed that long. You're a
yeah,
hardcore. I left
I,
about 5 years ago.
yeah, I'm slow. Once I like my tools, I give them a lot of slack. Yeah, maybe too much.
I have a great article on Medium where I compare Evernote to Notion when I switched, and it's like
Right.
it gets tons of traffic. Like it's like the top 10 search results on Google when you search Evernote
Oh
versus
yeah,
Notion.
yeah. Oh, okay. I'm gonna read. I'll put it in the show notes for the readers to. Okay, cool. So that's an important lesson as well. That if you have a great product and embed it, then make sure to keep giving it the right attention. Because if you do like Evernote and you sort of disregard important capabilities, then your users are gonna go away. In your case, to Notion. Um, I haven't left yet. Although I have to admit that I've added like 3 or 4 other tools. So I only use Evernote technically to scan my mail at the moment, because that part sort of works, and why break our working system?
That's true. If that part's working.
Okay, well, very cool. I learned a few things today, and I think a lesson for our listeners is also to think about what's your exit gonna be, and in what vertical is it gonna be, and second, have they looked at embedding their software into what, because with a SaaS product, nearly everything is embeddable, so that should probably be on your list as a SaaS vendor. Do you want to be big by yourself, or do you want to be a big player inside the real big guys like Notion and everybody else?
Yep. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, and an opportunity for a lot of companies. And think about it early, because you do have to build some stuff into the way you create your product so that it's easily portable. But yeah, great strategy.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot for this session, and we'll post a link to your blog.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thanks.